we'll be putting a initially small tariff on pharmaceuticals, but in 1 year,
President
1.5 years maximum, it's going to go to 150%, and then it's going to go to 250%, because we want pharmaceuticals made in our country.
President Trump has launched his most aggressive trade move yet, this time targeting pharmaceuticals. He's announced a phased tariff plan, starting with a small rate now, rising to 150% in a year, and potentially hitting 250%. The goal, he says, is to force drug companies to bring manufacturing back to the United States. At first glance, this sounds like a nationalist push for health security. But the list of countries affected goes far beyond any single target. The European Union, for instance, has already seen a 15% tariff applied to its pharmaceutical exports to the US. India, a major supplier of generic drugs and active pharmaceutical ingredients, is also in the crosshairs, especially as it continues buying oil from Russia, drawing additional tariff threats. And then there's Canada. While not explicitly named in the initial rounds, it's deeply embedded in the pharmaceutical supply chain with the US and is about to feel the pressure in other ways.
I was going to say, for Canadians, what the issue becomes is that our sticker price may have to come up, because if they're going to start matching up against prices in the US, we're going to be one of the countries that are pinpointed.
For Canada, the blow doesn't come directly from new tariffs, but from pricing policy. Trump's administration has demanded that US pharmaceutical companies implement a most favored nation pricing rule. That means the US should never pay more for medicine than any other country, adjusted for GDP. Canada, where drug prices are on average 50% lower than in the US for new treatments, becomes an immediate target. If drug makers comply, they'll need to raise Canadian prices to keep US prices low. This isn't just about economics, it's about access. Higher sticker prices in Canada could strain provincial budgets and delay the rollout of new medications. The damage doesn't stop there. Canada exports billions of dollars worth of generic drugs to the US while importing branded drugs in return. Politicizing that supply relationship risks delays, shortages, and a chilling effect on innovation, especially for a country already dealing with periodic medicine shortages.
And it's important to note that right now there aren't any blanket U.S. tariffs on pharmaceuticals. As part of that European Union-United States trade deal last week, there was a 15%, and that is already a pretty dramatic increase from the 0% that it was before.
The situation is equally fragile with the European Union. Just weeks after the US and EU announced a framework trade agreement in July, featuring hundreds of billions in planned investment and energy purchases, Trump's administration slapped a 15% tariff on EU pharmaceutical imports. This came despite expectations of tariff stability under the New Deal. That tariff hike didn't just increase costs, it undermined trust. For EU negotiators, it raised the question: what's the point of a framework if it's violated before it's finalized? With EU retaliatory tariffs postponed by 6 months, according to CBS, the clock is ticking. If Trump moves further, the fragile agreement could collapse, adding uncertainty to global pharmaceutical flows already under stress.
Because that was an executive order to bring drug prices down, but then this tariff proposal would, of course, likely bring drug prices up. So it's really going to depend on what these different drug companies do. Do they absorb that tariff? That's going to be a very, very big tariff to absorb. Or do they pass that on to consumers and make it more expensive?
Trump insists these tariffs will force companies to bring factories home. But building pharmaceutical facilities isn't like setting up a warehouse. It takes years, enormous capital, and FDA approvals. Industry giants like Eli Lilly and Johnson & Johnson have announced U.S. investments, but they won't offset short-term disruptions. In the meantime, costs will likely rise. Companies may pass tariffs on to consumers, whether through higher co-pays, insurance premiums, or retail prices. The same executive order meant to lower drug prices might end up raising them. And the global supply chain? It's not ready for this kind of shock. APIs from India, advanced therapies from Europe, and finished goods moving through Canada all risk being delayed or diverted, potentially affecting availability across the board. This may be the boldest move of Trump's second term, but it's also the most dangerous. In trying to control global drug pricing and force reshoring, he's putting both trade relationships and patient access on the line. Because if Trump doesn't recalibrate, the cost of these tariffs might not just be economic. It could be medical.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he has struck his biggest trade deal yet, and he's agreed to a trade framework with the European Union.
We've reached a deal. It's a good deal for everybody, I believe.
The United States and the European Union have agreed to a new trade framework. At the center of it, a 15% blanket tariff on most European goods entering the U.S. pharmaceuticals are exempt. But steel and aluminum from the EU will still face the steep 50% tariff imposed under national security provisions. In exchange, the EU committed to $750 billion worth of energy purchases from the United States and pledged $600 billion in new investments. They also agreed to significant defense procurement, although no figures were disclosed. This deal is not a binding treaty. It's a framework, announced just days before a 30% tariff was set to take effect. That timing wasn't accidental. It followed the same pattern we've seen in other Trump-era negotiations: pressure, then deal.
$750 billion worth of energy. To agree to invest into the United States $600 billion.
It's 15% tariffs across the board, all inclusive. The investments Mr. President just described, and the purchases over there. Indeed, basically the European market is open. It's 450 million people.
This isn't a one-off. We've already seen similar structures in deals with Japan, the United Kingdom, and Vietnam. In each case, Trump threatened steep tariffs. Then, after days or weeks of speculation, a framework was announced, usually built around a 15% baseline tariff and large-scale investment or procurement from the foreign side. This model flips the trade conversation. It's not about removing barriers. It's about creating predictability and charging for it. Trump's 15% now feels moderate, simply because the alternative he threatens is always worse. That's not trade liberalization. It's transactional stability. And the pattern is clear. Allies, competitors, everyone pays. Now, all eyes turn to Canada. A 35% tariff is scheduled to take effect on August 1st if no deal is reached. Ottawa has made it clear. The deadline is political, not legal. And they won't be rushed into a bad agreement. But the EU and Japan were longtime US allies too, and both had to accept Trump's terms. Canada knows that. And while it hasn't signed any framework, it's not sitting idle. Canada brings leverage to the table. Over $1 trillion in investment into the US, a deeply integrated energy and auto supply chain, and decades of cross-border ties with key American states. Alberta's oil, Ontario's parts plants, these aren't abstract advantages. They're real points of influence. Carney's government is watching the sequence, not resisting it. The strategy isn't to be first, it's to be smart. The federal government has already moved to manage public expectations. Early promises of a good deal have shifted into a more realistic message. This will be about managing trade-offs. The lessons are clear. No country has secured full exemptions. Baseline tariffs are now the floor. And rushing into a vague framework, like what Japan and the EU accepted, might avoid pain in the short term, but lead to problems later. Instead, Ottawa is preparing, working with provinces, identifying sectors that need shielding, and exploring room for targeted offsets. Trade diplomacy is still happening, just not on Trump's schedule. Trump's trade system isn't built on trust. It's built on leverage and price tags. But that doesn't mean Canada has to fold. It means Canada has to design, shape a deal that protects what matters most, whether that's auto, energy, or digital trade. The real danger isn't delay, it's giving in too early for too little. In this new world, the countries that hesitate might get hit. But the countries that rush, they might get locked into terms they regret. And Carney knows, better to sign the right deal late than the wrong deal too soon.
The president announced a deal with South Korea, which of course is a key U.S. trading partner, with just 2 days to spare before the deadline.
Along with the 15% tariffs, South Korea will invest $350 billion for investments owned and controlled by the United States.
2 days before his self-imposed August 1st deadline, Donald Trump made his move. He announced a deal with South Korea, a key trading partner, locking in tariffs at 15%. That headline came fast and loud, timed for maximum political impact. But behind the celebration, serious questions piled up. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick claimed South Korea would invest $350 billion into the U.S., and that 90% of profits would benefit Americans, all at Trump's direction. But no legal framework was shown, no enforcement mechanism explained. It echoed Trump's earlier deal with Japan, where flashy promises of $550 billion in investments were quietly walked back to a fraction of that total. And again, the math didn't add up. Just like with Europe, which recently pledged to buy massive volumes of U.S. energy, there's no clear indication whether these countries need that much, or whether the U.S. can even supply it. The numbers sounded big, but their foundation looked paper-thin. Trump's latest announcement, a deal with South Korea, followed the same pattern as his earlier agreements. While Seoul has confirmed steps toward formalizing the agreement, the details remain thin. There's no binding treaty language, no timeline for implementation, no clear enforcement mechanisms. The claimed 90-10 profit split raised eyebrows, especially since it hasn't been officially documented. Trump's model seems clear: stack huge numbers, broadcast them through friendly media, and create the illusion of control. Fox News even claimed that tariffs brought in $150 billion from foreign countries, when in reality, those tariffs are paid by American companies, often passed on to consumers. It's economic theater. The deals look impressive in headlines, but underneath, companies are quietly warning of layoffs, price hikes, and shrinking earnings. The Federal Reserve has now delayed a rate cut, citing uncertainty from these very tariff actions.
With the Americans are ongoing. It's possible that they may not conclude by the 1st of August.
While Trump crafted his South Korea announcement, Canada's position came into focus, and it wasn't what Washington wanted to hear. Prime Minister Mark Carney confirmed that no deal had been reached with the U.S., and that none is expected by the August 1st deadline. Canada's negotiators remain in Washington, but the message was clear: Ottawa will not rush into a bad agreement. Carney described the talks as complex and constructive, emphasizing areas like defense, security, and investment. But he gave no hint that Canada would follow the same path as Europe or Asia. And unlike Trump's announce first, explain later strategy, Canada chose clarity. No deal until the terms truly benefit Canadians. In less than a week, Trump had sealed back-to-back deals with Europe and South Korea, both promoted with billion-dollar promises and patriotic slogans. But Carney's refusal to sign on, even under the pressure of an artificial deadline, exposed a critical flaw in the president's game plan. Trump bet that all allies would fall in line before August 1st. That strategy worked with Brussels and Seoul. But Canada didn't blink. And now, the contrast is striking. While Trump claims to win big, his negotiating partners, from Japan to Europe to Korea, all quietly dispute the terms. Canada, at least, is saying so publicly. This isn't just about one missed deal. With each flashy but shallow agreement, Trump is creating economic confusion. The uncertainty has already caused the Fed to hold back, while businesses brace for cost shocks. And if Canada continues to resist, the White House may soon respond with steep tariffs, potentially up to 35% on Canadian goods. That would hit cross-border trade hard. And unlike Japan or South Korea, Canada has signaled it won't be bullied into submission. In the final hours before Trump's August 1st deadline, the scoreboard isn't as clean as the headlines suggest. The deals with Europe and South Korea look rushed, vague, and politically tailored. But Canada's delay may prove the most strategic move yet. Carney isn't just negotiating. He's calling out the game. And now, all eyes turn to August 1st.